This meeting is being recorded.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining Bravura Security today and Integro. We will just give ourselves a moment for a few more people to join, and then we will get started. All right, thanks again for joining Bravura Security and Integro in today's webinar, how ChatGPT and AI affect your identity strategy. It's been a topic floating around the internet, and many people have been talking about it for quite a while and a number of weeks. My name is Carolyn Evans, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Bravura Security. Today, you will be hearing from two identity security experts, Brian Christ, who is a senior sales engineer here with Bravura Security, and Jim Skidmore, who is the vice president of the solutions group of security and cloud consulting at our partner Integro. So today they will be talking about three key things. The most alarming aspects of the LastPass breach with some very timely updates, and the safeguards that your organization should be considering or have adopted since learning about that breach in December. Also, what your day one onboarding should look like and how to ensure how it is being done safely in light of the evolution in breaches that ChatGPT and AI are causing, essentially. And then finally, how zero knowledge password managers combined with strong phishing resistant MFA is becoming critical to protect your organization. So Brian and Jim will be available to talk about any of your questions as well. So please feel free to pop them in the chat here in this Zoom invite, and we'll get to them right at the end of this webinar. Over to you, Brian.
Hey, thanks, Carolyn. Did want to talk about the giveaway at the Gartner Identity and Access Management Summit. So that'll be held March 20th through 22nd. Carolyn, did you want to add anything about the people who register and the $50 or the 50 people who register?
Yes, absolutely. So as advertised, the first 50 people were entered to win the all access pass at the Gartner Identity Access Management Summit in March in Grapevine, Texas. So we have a pass that we'll be giving away. We'll be doing that draw tomorrow, and we'll be notifying you via email if you are the lucky winner.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. We can go on to the next slide. So we're going to be talking about two kind of high-profile items that may seem unconnected at first blush, but we're going to talk about both the LastPass breach and really ChatGPT is sort of kind of stealing the limelight, but really under the hood, what we're talking about is AI, a lot of it being open AI as the platform. As many folks know, LastPass did suffer a high-profile breach last year. Interestingly, hot off the press, there's some more details that are coming out about that breach. But if you look at the press release that was issued by the CEO, one of the interesting things about it is, so there's been some opaqueness to this, kind of lack of clarity around what the attackers were actually able to garner or not. Some of that we've kind of identified here on the screen, but we've really we've taken the time to sort of kind of bring an analogy to the table, the game of Clue, and what that, how that relates to the LastPass breach. If you've ever played the game of Clue, Jim, you've played Clue, right?
So I have.
We had a lot of fun putting this together because some of this information here that on the bullets really um, allow an attacker. They don't get direct access to credentials, but if you think about the game of Clue, um, you know, I need a few things to be really effective at it, right? So, um, Jim, what's your favorite actor in Clue? What?
Um, Gosh, that's a good question. Maybe Mrs. Maybe Peacock. I would have to go
Yeah,
with.
I think Peacock's a favorite. Colonel Mustard is a good
Yeah.
one. But in the game of Clue, you're basically looking for a couple of items to help you narrow down how to make that educated guess. And really, that's what LastPass breach does. Um, Early on, we learned that things like customer billing information, name, address, those kinds of things were revealed. But then it gets a little more granular, URLs associated with secrets that were stored in LastPass and other bits of information that can be used to really sort of laser focus the attack. Jim, your thoughts on that?
Yeah. It was a lot more far-reaching, I think, than a lot of us thought originally. Turns out we have customers, friends, some very close friends actually, industry colleagues that were involved in it. I think what we're now finding, even in the last couple of days, I know you have some updated information on that, but it seems to be, we know there were 25 million users involved. I don't think we understood the order of magnitude and the fact that they were even able to compromise sort of identity roles, potentially to kind of orchestrate any number of things, right? Potentially provisioning or deprovisioning of users to things, call home capabilities that are not, they're seldom seen in breaches of this type. So yeah, it was definitely really impactful.
Um, One of the things that I thought was really interesting, I started to talk about this a minute ago, which was in the press release that the LastPass CEO issued, the first one that I saw. The guidance was to beware of on high alert for phishing and social engineering. Interestingly enough, if you read the latest Verizon report, you'll find that phishing and pretexting they remain still like the number one form of attack. So there is quite a bit of exposure here on that front because the data itself, again, while it doesn't directly give you, the secrets themselves, it really gives a would-be attacker that narrowed down direction, just like in the game of Clue. You're just looking for that one last piece, and it really gives them, all of the things that they need to sort of narrow down those phishing and pretexting types of attacks. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. Jim, any final thoughts on this?
No, I think it's lessons learned, and I think we need to think about how we're, securing everything, right? This is a development environment. Obviously, this is not just a standard user, so we're getting it from all sides now. So I think it's important to, to be reticent about, all the surfaces that are out there now. So.
Haley, if you want to move us on. I want to just, before we get into this, the content on the slide, I want to put a mental bookmark in your mind as we were talking about the game of Clue. I'm going to come back to sort of this gaming theme here a little bit later. So I said that we're going to be kind of looking at LastPass, and then we're looking at ChatGPT just as kind of the darlings of the headline right now. So ChatGPT is getting a lot of attention. It's getting so much attention that I had tried to log into my account the other day, and this message popped up that ChatGPT is at capacity. So folks are really starting to explore this this tool. That's what it is. It's a tool, just like anything. It can be great in the right hands. It can be horrible in the wrong hands. Uh, Jim and I, we had quite a bit of fun when we were talking through this particular slide. I'm going to tell a little story. I think he's going to tell a little story, and I think it'll give you the idea of where this could go. Both good and bad. So I was tinkering around with it the other day. I do rental properties on the side, and so I said, well, hey, what if I wanted to build a set of stair stringers, right? I've never done it before. Can I do it? I just asked ChatGPT to write me some instructions for building some stair stringers and gave it some rise and run and those kind of things. And it spit out a beautiful set of instructions for building some stair stringers. But then I kind of to bring it down into the technical world a little bit. I'm an old C programmer, been around the block quite a bit on that front, and so I tried to throw some curveballs to ChatGPT. I asked it to, write me a little program that finds the square root. It did it easy, no problem. Turned around and said, okay, let me see you do that, but I want you to allocate all the memory on the heap instead of the stack. And it did that just fine. And then I took it a little bit further and I said, okay, I'm going to give it something really obscure. I said, I want you to draw a circle. And I want you to use Duff's device for iterations. And man, it knocked it out of the park. So those are some examples of some really good ways that I think tools like ChatGPT built on top of OpenAI are really going to bring help to areas of vocation where said like carpentry could be one. The programmer that's trying to figure out how to do something or needs a second check on their code could use ChatGPT for this. And so you've got some really great productive use cases for it. But Jim, tell me about the bad stuff that you can do.
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, I think when we started to get into this, we reached out to some of our partners. We talked to some of their industry friends. We realized, I was kind of familiar with the OpenAI environment originally and was aware of potential spoofing that could go on with second factors of authentication. And I think that's going to be one of the bellwether discussions today, and how to reduce risk along these lines now. But what we found from one of our partners basically was that, they'd already been looking through, underground chat rooms and things like that, that ChatGPT, and more specifically ChatGPT 3, don't necessarily need to create anything sophisticated to be effective. And the net is, they've already seen, research mentioned in the forums, that, a lot of threat actors are discussing right now the use of the chatbot to improve malware code, right? Because we know it doesn't make, syntax errors. It's kind of like a QA for the dark web. So the research, a lot of the researchers tested the coding capabilities of the chatbot basically to see how it could help, or what it could potentially provide to hackers. And now I think with each passing week since we've been researching heavily, we're seeing a lot more capability. And it's not so much that people need to create anything very sophisticated. It's mostly about, how many people now that can enter their circle now, and develop other developers, sort of cyber criminals, and develop tools. And honestly, one of the funny things was that they were talking about in the forums was how interesting they thought it was from a cost saving perspective. It's, sophisticated threats can be created much less expensively now because, savings are super important when you're writing malware or, looking at ransomware attack vectors or other things. So I think we're going to learn more over time, probably with each passing month since the release, of different use cases and different methodologies. But what we know and what Brian and I were talking about the other day is, people that were never developers before and never created code or malicious code for that matter, are able to now experiment and create potentially malicious payloads using simple scripts, using Excel attachments, using any number of items. So that's, you know, Brian, to your point, definitely one of the areas that that we're seeing already, and it's already been kind of proven. I know also IBM did some research on OpenAI prior to this. I believe the tool they created was called Deep Locker. You might want to take a spin out there, or somebody may, but they've already kind of verified this as well, and sort of underground activity that's been out there. So, you know, we keep usually thinking, wow, where could we be in 6 months? The bottom line is people are using ChatGPT right now to develop malicious code. It's underway. It's not anything anybody's waiting for. The capabilities are there, and regardless of what you sign up for when you're registering or licensing or anything else, that's not even a, you know, a blocker, if you will. So that's kind of a little of the experience that we've been seeing recently. And we're continuing to see more and more and gain more perspective from kind of both sides. So that, you know, I could probably throw a couple of other use cases out here, but I don't want to dominate all our time here. So
I think we'll go on to the next slide.
Mhm.
And Jim, you kind of hit on that. Oh, before we mentally move on, that picture of the genie that you saw, just for fun, I asked Dolly, which is built on OpenAI, I said, just, hey, give me a picture of a genie coming out of a lamp, right? So just you know, piece of artwork in 10 seconds or less. So you can keep going forward. I just wanted to throw that out there. So BlackBerry did a study basically covering a lot of the concerns around ChatGPT. I would expand it to say it's really AI in general, but it was all of the things really that Jim was talking about with the malware. And one of the things that came out of the LastPass breach, the most recent report, is that C2 software was deployed, and C2 software downloaders, if you look at the Verizon report, they're like the second thing that someone does when they get their foot in the door, right? Is they get their foot in the door and they want to keep it open. And so, you know, you're look at the percentage of concern about here. I think these are all really, really valid. The ability for someone who's never written malware to just, you know, have ChatGPT write it for them so that they can deliver those dangerous payloads. I want to talk a little bit about the phishing specifically. So if you think back to one of those first slides where phishing, social engineering continues to be at the top of the list in terms of attack vectors, you know, coupled with the fact that even LastPass himself said, hey, you know, at risk here, social engineering and phishing. And I think this is where ChatGPT gets really kind of dangerous in this arena, is its ability, if you think about the game of Clue that we started with, if you have a set of data, known data about the folks you want to attack, and you can feed that into ChatGPT, and you can allow it to craft some really almost personal, very believable phishing emails. And today, you know, phishing emails, when you look at them, if you're relatively astute, you can sort of tell that they're boilerplate. But imagine if it was sort of personally tuned for each person it was delivering a payload to, how powerful that can be. And again, you're putting this into the hands of those that really wouldn't normally know how to do any of this stuff. Jim, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's some very, you know, top of mind use cases that come to play. Some of them are mentioned in here, but especially around two-factor authentication. I think this is going to change a lot of security policy and the way people look at their posture now. I see facial recognition being spoofable, geolocation, obviously anything you know, right? So the bottom line is, you know, we're going to go back to, I think, our roots with regard to identity proofing and CAs, and kind of how, you know, we're kind of looking at the world, because I don't think it's going to be very long at all where someone's going to be able to kind of spoof their way into that 2FA arena also. So
Yeah, before we
Yeah.
move on to the next slide, this just occurred to me yesterday. I was thinking about how ChatGPT could improve the landscape for the hacker on in terms of phishing and social engineering. And you know, obviously better crafted emails, a larger volume, but there's actually really interesting video on YouTube from OpenAI where a video game is trained. You had a game of hide and seek, and it took millions of rounds of iterations, but the AI figured out how to basically improve its score over time, break the physics barriers of the game. And so, if you think about this conversation, this analogy of a game, I think there's a real potential here for something to for these phishing and social engineering campaigns to be trained and weighted towards successful attacks, so it starts to improve upon the kinds of messages that figuring out what's more effective and less effective, and over time tailoring those based on results. So hadn't really intended to talk about that, but just occurred to me the other day, so I figured I'd walk that into the conversation. If you want to go on to the next slide, Jim, I'm going to let you start off with this one. I think this one is a little bit near and dear to you. You had some stories as we were talking through all of this, especially with regard to the education landscape. So
Yeah, I kind of provided some predecessors here, but when we look at FIDO Alliance, when we look at all the standards that we utilize for identity proofing now, and these are relevant, obviously, for certain compliance issues, as we know, other than fingerprint biometrics in some cases or other forms of 2FA, a lot of things have been really eliminated from a compliance perspective from being purely identity proof worthy for these compliance issues. So we were starting to get to, and by the way, even SMS now is up for grabs, right? We're looking at how breached that is, and I think everybody probably on this call probably understands, why everybody's using encrypted services like Signal, and obviously WhatsApp is that way now, and with the early advent of Proton Mail and everything else, I think it's pretty easy to understand that some of the easy second factors that we are used to, that we become accustomed to, are going to be extremely difficult now. Misinformation, from a facial recognition perspective, and the exploits along those lines are 7 or 8 years old now. This is going to make that easy, and it's going to make it easy not just for kind of deep-seated sort of miscreant behavior, but I think we'll see a whole new level of average users kind of wanting to get in the game and figuring out how to kind of do that. As I mentioned earlier, we can also emulate geolocation. So that is another area of concern. I'll be able to basically spoof that I am, somewhere where I really am not. And there are definitely use cases that are going to impact industries there. The quality of phishing, I talked a little about syntax and other issues before, are going to continue to get more and more believable and better and better. And interestingly, as I mentioned earlier as well, that syntax is almost perfect with with AI now and with ChatGPT. So there'll be really a quality assurance capability there to make sure that that code gets executed, payloads get executed. So, again, as we talked about, it doesn't really require any kind of advanced technical knowledge. We see average, desktop users being able to kind of create, some of these AI use cases without a whole lot of problem. And, as I mentioned earlier, even simple scripting, cut and paste probably will enable people to kind of launch some things and not really be, kind of recognized. We may not find, that person's domain or URL or anything else because we were seeing other use cases where that's almost being hidden too. Now, we know if we're collecting packet data or if we're collecting, IPv segment data that can potentially tie back to a specific person. But, who knows where that'll even go. So, um, yeah, the identity lifecycle is in a way going to get more complex, but in a way it's going to get simpler. I think we're going to go back to our knitting. I think we're going to probably realize that we can't go very far from a potential spoofing perspective. Um, we may go to more AI proof kind of methodologies. But certainly in 2FA, there's ways that we need to think about this now, because again, all you have to do is look at your phone now. There may be exploits eventually that'll even go on there that recognize your face and, be able to kind of hijack things. So it's a very different world that I see, but I do think if you adhere to standard identity principles, if things are properly encrypted, if you have attributes created correctly for users and roles, if things are, kind of standardly built in sort of a best practice way, that's really going to kind of reduce the capability for a lot of this to happen. So, the more this changes, and I've been kind of working in this realm for a couple decades now, the more it changes, the more it becomes important to enforce kind of the standards of identity and reverse proxy authentication, but now cloud also. So yeah, I would say that's kind of a perspective. It'll be interesting to see over time how this evolves and changes. And I think kind of quarter by quarter, we could almost do an update to say, here's kind of the new thing we're seeing as, different factors of authentication get, kind of taken over at times or compromised. And we'll probably see other use cases that we're not even considering at this point. So that's, yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more there, Jim. I think what we're going to see, and you and I kicked around the idea of maybe, doing something in, 3 or 4 months from now, and seeing where, unfortunately, the bad actors take this stuff. But had a lot of fun prior to preparing for all of this. I think I sent you the link where, they trained a voice, right, in 30 seconds of audio, was completely able to clone a voice. And imagine if the bad actor uses that to leave a voicemail that says, hey, pretends to be the CFO or the CTO or somebody of importance that has access. Most people are going to trust their ears, right? Oh, the CFO left me a voicemail. He's traveling. He needs access to this password and needs me to send it to him right away, right? I mean, totally believable. And so I think what you're going to see is these different factors of authentication that have been trustworthy in the past. We're going to see sort of a compromise and a kind of a ratcheting back to things that are more tangible, more rooted in reality and grounded in things that are hard to spoof as we move forward. In fact, I think we'll touch on that on the next slide. So if you want to go ahead and move us. Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about zero trust. I thought, as we were putting this all together, I said, well, is this old hat? Or people sick and tired of hearing about zero trust? Turns out they're not. I went and pulled some stats on zero trust and the trajectory and the interest in it continues to grow. But I think what's really kind of the variation on the conversation today is, what can you trust, right? So never trust, always verify. But well, now how are you verifying, right? Like now we're talking about the quality of what you verify with. So the something you are, the something you have, and the something you know. Not all are equal, right, Jim? Like you kind of alluded to this a minute ago, but I mean, they're not all equal, are they?
No, they're not. We're sort of almost getting rid of one of those factors at this point. Something you have, obviously some people, developers clearly, and others will use tokens. Tokens are, as I mentioned before, are going to be difficult if SMS becomes a non-standard, unless they're using hard tokens, right? Something you are is what we're challenged with here today to some degree, right? And it's interesting because as you were talking about this, I thought about some friends of ours in pharma and in direct store delivery and retail and others that use IVR-based solutions and VRUs, voice response units, to basically report in from the road to all of the applications, and in some cases use them to unlock. It's going to be very interesting to see how those kind of roadworthy people deal with the something URs, because again, unless somebody compromises national fingerprint databases, which everybody is not even unless you've been a bonded employee of the government or a bank or something like that, yours probably aren't out there. But that's becoming more and more sort of the single source, because something is clearly going to be in question here, and something you are. So the zero knowledge password manager part, I think when we at the outset of this discussion, we pretty much understand why that's completely up for grabs as well. It's getting harder and harder to protect the vaults. It's getting harder and harder to do anything except basically log into an encrypted service, which is what banking has gone to with GLBA, and also with some of the other commerce requirements that are out on the web now for moving money. So yeah, I would say I'm sure people hopefully on this call are kind of thinking about that, but I think it's a consideration that we're going to have to think about as we go forward. So
Yeah,
that's
it
kind of,
ultimately comes down to what can we do today that I'm beginning to think that Pandora's box being opened is going to cause a little bit of chaos, I think, for the next 12 months until we really get a handle on what capable of, what not capable of. You and I talked about the crystal ball and how this was going to be an interesting set of conversations, just because you don't know what you don't know. But I think one of the things that we can solidly say is that a zero knowledge solution where you're storing your password so that the something is one of the weak vectors. So you need to do the absolute best you can to protect it. And the something you are, some sort of biometric, and the something you have. And I think the something you have is probably in the long term going to be one of the most important. It's going to be really difficult to spoof something you're holding, or that it's with you. And I think we're already sort of starting to see movement into that, and which is why I kind of want to talk about what's up here on the next slide. I know we're running long on time here. What I want to do is, first of all, I want to thank everybody that attended today. We are going to carve out a few minutes for some question and answer, but I want to make you aware of a 90-day trial offer that we have. So it's no obligation. We just want to get you, kind of exposed to a set of tools that couple exactly what we're talking about: zero knowledge, strong zero knowledge, so that that thing the something you can protect it as best you can. But it also gets coupled with, strong biometric, FIDO certified authentication with something you have into the zero knowledge solution. So we want to give everybody on the line an opportunity to try that out, put it through a test drive, and do that for 90 days with, again, no commitment. And so at this point, I think we've run over time a little bit, but I think we can still afford to take a few questions if anybody's popped any into the chat channel. So
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat function here. We've had a couple come through. Brian, I'll send this one to you. So you've mentioned a zero knowledge password manager a few times. Are you referring to a business password manager?
Okay, great question. So zero knowledge simply means that only the user themselves has access to it. So in a lot of sort of shared secret models of storage, there's sort of an omniscient view where somebody, at maybe the top of a hierarchy can peer down into it. That would not be zero knowledge. Whereas if if my vault, if my secrets are encrypted in such a way that I'm the only one that can get access to them, with something like a strong master password coupled with biometric authentication, that makes it really, really challenging for anyone to gain access to those. Uh, maybe they could even steal the data storage mechanism for something like that, being super generic when I say that. But if you don't have a valid means of decrypting that object, then you're dead in the water. And so that's what zero knowledge truly means. Great question, though.
Okay, thank you for that. Somebody asked for the URL for the trial, so I just popped that in there. We'll also send out, we have one more question that just came through, but I wanted to mention that we will also send out a recording of this webinar and then a link to that trial as well. So if you don't get it in this chat, we will send it in an email right after this webinar. So the next question, and it looks like the last question, unless any others come through, for Jim. What's the lowest hanging fruit for LastPass customers to protect themselves?
It's funny. We actually kind of made a move in this direction ourselves. If you're literally working with the keys to kingdoms, right, and that whether you're a privileged user, managing network access, applications, cloud assets, or what have you, we have gone to kind of what we've been talking about, an encrypted service that enables us to pass information back and forth, that, because it can be unencrypted. I know that Bravura has a service like this, I think called Safe, which is great. And we really think that is a policy change that is absolutely required in an organization. People are sending things on chat, on IM, on Slack, on, obviously email and other areas. And now when you look at the, kind of a lot of the behavior that's out there, a lot of the bots and more automated kind of threats can basically read and look for in unstructured data password like components that are out there. We've already seen this. So I would much rather get an email that says, Carolyn or Brian or whomever sent me, that information to go log in and to kind of check that out. It takes about 20 seconds, and then I know I'm moving things in a very intelligent way, just because we've seen so many bad things happen when people are sharing this information back and forth, and including insider threat. So that's kind of another thing, right? Even from a compliance perspective, if you look at people that are working in financial services or energy or healthcare, that's a very common one. We've seen situations where people are not even allowed to use faxes anymore, because if they're in a common area not open to just one person, they can't do it. So I think it's very important to kind of think about, an encrypted service or something like that to ensure that, you're not going to, have these types of challenges. A lot of the leading tools now that we were relying on with the old kind of methodology of ESSO, if you will, are no longer, completely going to be viable or safe. I think we need to think about how we really deal with that going forward. And for us right now, the encrypted service is definitely the way to go. So.
That's good advice. Oh, we have one more question come in. How open AI, oh, no, sorry, it was just a comment. How open AI security and air gap security works hand in hand.
Yeah, there's always something to be said for air gap, right, Jim?
There sure is. Give me some scissors and I'll I'll stop the problem right now, right? No, I think that's more of from Shinari there. I think that's more of a statement, and I would definitely agree with that statement. Yeah, air gap is a good way to go when you have any questions about things, and taking best practices, dev environments that you're working on. As Brian talked about earlier, when we were talking about LastPass, the reason things happened was gaining access to a dev environment, right? At the end of the day, at least 25 million, probably more like 35 or 40 million identities were compromised simply from getting to one desktop. So, it's pretty important to reduce risk anywhere that you can and make your organization aware of, kind of this new wave of how we need to think about things. We used to run around telling people, 2FA is really important. I still think zero trust is under discussed and underplayed in any other way than marketing. The bottom line is if you think you're at least privilege or getting there, you will be ultimately safer. There is no magic silver bullet for that, like you will hear all over the market, other than kind of going through the cultural change that you need to make it happen. So, but yeah, good point by our watcher out there. There is no, to Brian's point, there is no substitute for disconnectivity. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Brian and Jim. That wraps our webinar discussion for today. We'll be hosting another webinar in 2 weeks, actually, on identity security with another one of our partners, our tech partner, Elastic. So we'll be sending out some emails on that shortly. And we also, somebody had asked how to get a recording of this. We'll be sending out a recording of this webinar and also a link to that 90-day trial this afternoon. So you can click on either of those, and you can also respond to it if you have questions, and we will set up some time to talk with you or answer them via email, whichever you prefer. Thank you very much for your time. On behalf of Reverse Security and Integro, have an awesome day.
Okay, thanks.